Although there are many countries which have become quite developed, be it in any matter like technology, economy, infrastructure or industries. But today we are going to talk about such countries, which are almost on the verge of extinction, or in other words, have already ended. Like a country can be called developed only, when the economy and technology of that country is good. For these reasons we say that this country is developed. Actually, the countries we are going to talk about were progressing well earlier, but what happened to them that they are on the verge of destruction? So let us know the reasons why these countries got ruined. So our first country is Venezuela. Imagine waking up one day to find that everything you thought was secure has crumbled. Venezuela was once the richest country in Latin America, thanks to its vast oil reserves. But now, people are starving, hospitals are without medicine, and many have fled the country just to survive. So, how did it all fall apart? After all, how did a country which was so advanced end up in such a situation? So now let us know the reason for this. Earlier, in the late 1990s, Hugo Chavez rose to power with promises to redistribute wealth and empower the poor. At first, it worked. Oil money flowed, and for a while, things looked good. But the problem with oil-dependent economies is that they're like a house of cards. If oil prices fall, the whole thing collapses. And that's exactly what happened. When Chavez passed away in 2013, his successor, Nicolas Maduro, continued the same policies, but the economy couldn't handle it. Hyperinflation took over. Can you imagine carrying bags of cash just to buy bread? People couldn't afford basic necessities. Power outages became the norm. Schools closed. Health care collapsed. It's like the life of an entire nation was sucked out, leaving only survival in its wake. People began leaving in droves. Imagine feeling so desperate that you're willing to walk hundreds of miles to Colombia or Brazil, not knowing if you'll ever come back. Will the country recover? It's hard to say, but for now, millions of people are living through a nightmare, one they didn't choose but are forced to endure. Now this country is almost finished and now this country is struggling with its poverty. According to a survey, 50% of the people here are poor. Due to bad management, political instability and corruptions, this country has been brought to this condition. The people here are living in poverty, and poverty is the biggest sorrow in this world. So friends, now let us move on to our next country, which is Yemen. Yemen's story isn't one you hear about often, but it should be. Imagine living in a country where bombs fall from the sky, where children are more likely to starve than to go to school. This is the reality for millions of people in Yemen, a country torn apart by a civil war that seems to have no end. It started in 2015. The conflict between the Houthi rebels and the Yemeni government has damaged the country's economy and infrastructure, so due to this, unemployment and poverty increased a lot in the country. On March 26, 2015, Saudi Arabia also started intervention in Yemen, against Yemeni President Abdrabbuh Manas Hadi. So friends, due to these reasons, many airstrikes and ground battles took place in Yemen, and as a result the country kept getting ruined. And friends, not only this. Hospitals have been bombed, schools destroyed, and basic services like clean water and electricity are distant memories for many. Imagine being a parent in Yemen, knowing that your child could die not just from a bomb, but from something as preventable as a lack of food or medicine. The world's largest humanitarian crisis is unfolding there, but so few people are talking about it. Yemen's economy is in ruins, with the local currency nearly worthless. Millions depend on international aid just to survive, and yet that aid often gets blocked by the very factions fighting in the war. It's a nightmare scenario, one where there's no easy solution. Yemenis live every day hoping for peace, but with so many competing interests and foreign powers involved, the future remains grim. So now we move on to our next country, which is Syria. If you were to look at photos of Syria before 2011, you'd see bustling markets, thriving cities, and a country on the rise. Now, it's almost unrecognizable. Entire cities have been flattened, and millions of people have fled. What happened to Syria isn't just a story of war, it's a story of a nation that's been shattered to its core. The Syrian civil war began in 2011 during the Arab Spring. Peaceful protests against President Bashar al-Assad's regime were met with violence, and soon, the country plunged into chaos. What started as a fight between the government and rebels quickly spiraled out of control, with foreign powers, extremist groups like ISIS, and even Kurdish forces joining the fray. The result: over 500,000 dead and millions more displaced. Imagine being forced from your home, not knowing if you'll ever return. Families torn apart, entire generations growing up in refugee camps, and those who stayed behind faced bombings, chemical attacks, and starvation sieges. Syria's economy, once one of the strongest in the region, has collapsed. Inflation is through the roof, jobs are scarce, and rebuilding seems like an impossible task. So friends, this was the story of Syria. I don't think it will grow quickly now. So let's move on to our next country, which is Somalia. Somalia's collapse isn't a recent event. It's been going on for decades. Since 1991, when the central government fell, Somalia has been stuck in a cycle of violence, poverty, and instability. For many, Somalia is synonymous with chaos. Warlords, militias, and extremist groups like Al-Shabaab have controlled large parts of the country, leaving ordinary people to fend for themselves. Imagine living in a country where there's no effective government, no one to provide security, healthcare, or education. That's been the reality for Somalis for over 30 years. The capital, Mogadishu, has seen wave after wave of violence, with warlords battling for control and civilians caught in the middle. Economically, Somalia is one of the poorest countries in the world. Most people rely on farming or fishing to survive, but droughts and famine have made even that a struggle. Corruption is rampant, and any aid that does make it into the country is often stolen or misused. People are forced to live in survival mode, day in and day out, with no end in sight. The international community has tried to help stabilize Somalia, but the deep divisions between clans and the rise of extremist groups have made it nearly impossible. While there are small glimmers of hope, some areas have seen improvement in recent years. Somalia remains a country on the edge. So our next country is Afghanistan. Afghanistan's story is one of endless war. From the Soviet invasion in the 1980s to the US invasion in 2001, and now the Taliban's return to power in 2021, the Afghan people have endured decades of conflict. It's hard to imagine living in a country where war is all you've ever known, but for many Afghans, that's the reality. When the US withdrew in 2021, the Taliban quickly took over, and Afghanistan plunged into uncertainty. The economy collapsed almost overnight. International aid, which had kept much of the country afloat, was cut off. Jobs disappeared, banks closed, and millions of people were left with nothing. The Taliban's return has also meant a rollback of women's rights and basic freedoms. Schools for girls have been shut down, and many women have been forced to stay home. It's like the progress made over the past 20 years has been erased in the blink of an eye. For the Afghan people, the future is uncertain. Many are trying to flee, but for those who remain, survival is a daily struggle. Afghanistan has been in a state of collapse for decades, and sadly, it seems like that cycle will continue for the foreseeable future. Today Venezuela, Syria, Somalia, Afghanistan and Yemen have been destroyed, some due to political instability and some due to civil war. Now it cannot be said that these countries will become like before, because even at this time there are conflicts going on there. These countries remind us that the collapse of a nation isn't just about the fall of a government, it's about the destruction of people's lives, hopes, and futures. This is because of humans, the doer is someone else and someone else has to suffer. All this will continue, who knows what will happen next. So friends, if you have something to say, you can tell me in the comment section. And if you like the video then please subscribe the channel. See you in the next video.